You think a father selling his daughter is the worst thing you'll hear today? It's not even close. The story starts in a town called Dustwater Creek, but it could have been anywhere. One of those places where the dust gets in your teeth and the hope gets squeezed out of your soul. The year was 1873. Out on the edge of town, a little girl named Rose Crawford was hiding in the shadows. She was 12 years old, all sharp angles and big eyes, and she was pressed up against the grimy window of Harrison's trading post. Inside, her own father, Henry Crawford, was standing with his hat in his hands, his shoulders slumped so low they nearly touched his knees. He was a good man who'd been broken by a bad world. 3 years of drought had turned his farm to dust, and the bank had picked the bones clean. Now he was about to lose the only thing he had left. "Please, Mr. Harrison," Henry's voice cracked, thin as old paper. "I know it ain't right, but I got no choice." Behind the counter, Chester Harrison leaned back. He was a man made of greed and stale tobacco smoke. A cruel little smile played on his lips. "Business is business, Henry," he said, his voice slick with poison. "That daughter of yours, she'll fetch a good price." Rose's heart hammered against her ribs. "A good price?" "I got a man coming through," Harrison continued. "He's always looking for fresh faces for his place up in Silver Creek." The words hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Rose didn't know exactly what kind of place it was, but she knew it was a one-way trip, a place girls went and never came back from. Her father, the man who taught her how to whistle, the man who piggybacked her through the fields, was selling her. Tears cut clean tracks through the dirt on her cheeks. She backed away from the window, a silent scream trapped in her throat. She ran. She ran without thinking, her bare feet pounding the packed earth, the setting sun painting the sky the color of blood and fire. She didn't stop until she reached what used to be her home, the Crawford Ranch. The bank owned it now, but the house was still there, an empty skeleton full of ghosts. She collapsed onto the porch steps, the place where her mother used to hum lullabies. And as the first star pricked the twilight sky, she heard it, the slow, steady sound of hoofbeats. A rider was coming, a tall shadow against the dying light. Rose scrambled to her feet, ready to bolt, but there was nowhere left to run. The man reined in his horse. He was older, maybe 40, with steel-gray hair and eyes that looked like they'd seen too much of the world. He swung down from the saddle, his spurs jingling softly. He took off his hat. "Evening, little miss," he said, his voice quiet and deep. "You all right out here all by yourself?" This was Jonathan Mitchell, owner of the biggest ranch in 3 counties, a man they called a legend, though no one could ever quite agree why. Some said it was his honesty, others whispered it was something else entirely, something harder. "This used to be my home," Rose whispered, wiping her nose with the back of her hand. Mitchell's face softened, but his eyes stayed sharp. "I heard about your family's troubles. Where's your father, Rose?" The question broke her. The story spilled out. The trading post, the deal, the man from Silver Creek. With every word, she expected him to turn away, to tell her it was none of his business. But he didn't. He knelt, getting down on her level. "Rose," he said, and his voice was so serious it made the air go still. "Did Harrison or your father, did they mention a name or a symbol? Maybe a man with a particular brand?" It was a strange question, a terrifyingly specific question. Rose shook her head, confused. "No, sir. Just, a man from Silver Creek." Mitchell's eyes narrowed, a flicker of something dark and ancient passing through them. It wasn't pity, it was recognition. "No one is going to sell you, child," he said, his voice like iron. "I'm going to make you a promise. You are not for sale, not today, not ever." He lifted her onto his horse, and as they rode towards the sprawling lights of his ranch, Rose clung to him, a piece of driftwood in a storm. She thought she was being saved. She had no idea she had just become a soldier in a war she never knew existed. And Jonathan Mitchell wasn't just a rancher. He was a man who had been waiting 15 years for a chance to fight back. The Mitchell Ranch was another world, a fortress of stone and timber, with a housekeeper named Mrs. Davies who had kind eyes but hands that looked like they knew how to handle more than just a skillet. She took one look at Rose, filthy and terrified, and her whole body went rigid. She cleaned her, fed her, and dressed her in clothes that had once belonged to another little girl. These were Sarah's, Mrs. Davies said softly, her voice catching. Mr. Mitchell's daughter. What happened to her? Rose asked. Fever, Mrs. Davies said quickly. Too quickly. Took her 15 years ago. She turned away, fussing with the blankets, but not before Rose saw the lie in her eyes. It was the same kind of look her own father had when he was trying to hide something. Later that night, tucked into a bed softer than a cloud, Rose couldn't sleep. She crept out of her room and saw a light on in Mitchell's study. The door was ajar. She peered through the crack. Jonathan Mitchell was not doing ranch paperwork. On his desk, laid out on a piece of dark leather, was a collection of weapons that made her blood run cold. Not hunting rifles. These were different. Pistols with intricate carvings, knives that seemed to drink the lamplight, and in the center of it all, a heavy silver belt buckle. Engraved on the buckle was a scorpion. Mitchell picked it up, his thumb tracing the shape of the stinger. His face was a mask of cold fury. He wasn't a grieving father. He was a hunter, and Rose realized the terrible truth. He hadn't just stumbled upon her by accident. He had been looking for something, looking for a sign, and she had delivered it. The next morning, Mitchell rode into Dustwater Creek. He didn't look like a rancher coming to town for supplies. He looked like a storm rolling in off the plains. He moved with a purpose that made people get out of his way. He walked straight into the trading post. Henry Crawford was there, nursing a cheap whiskey, his face pale with shame. Harrison was behind the counter, counting his money. Mitchell, Harrison grunted, his eyes narrowing. Didn't expect to see you. We need to discuss the Crawford girl, Mitchell said, his voice deceptively calm. Harrison laughed. That's between me and Henry. A simple business transaction. There's nothing simple about the Scorpion Syndicate, Mitchell replied. The name dropped into the room like a block of ice. Harrison froze, his hand halfway to his pocket. Henry looked back and forth between them, his confusion turning to terror. He had no idea what that name meant, but he knew it was a death sentence. I don't know what you're talking about, Harrison stammered, sweat beading on his forehead. Don't you? Mitchell took a step forward. You traffic children for them. You take broken men like Henry and you leverage their debt. You turn them into suppliers. I know how it works. Harrison's bravado crumbled into dust. This wasn't some do-gooder rancher. This was someone who knew. What do you want? He whispered. I want the contract, Mitchell said. I'm buying Henry's debt. All of it. It's not that simple, Harrison hissed. It's a blood contract. If I break it, they'll kill me. They'll kill us all. That's your problem, Mitchell said, his hand resting on the butt of his pistol. Give me the contract, or I'll give them your head. The air crackled with tension. Henry Crawford, finally understanding the true nature of the deal he'd made, let out a choked sob. He hadn't just been selling his daughter for money. He'd been selling her to monsters. Harrison, shaking, pulled a ledger from under the counter. He scribbled something on a piece of paper, canceling the debt. Mitchell threw a heavy bag of coins on the counter. It was far more than Henry owed. This is for the girl's freedom, Mitchell said. And this, he placed a single gleaming gold coin next to the bag, is to let your masters know that the man they call the Ghost is back in business. Harrison stared at the coin, his face as white as a sheet. He recognized the mark on it, the scorpion. Mitchell turned to Henry. Your debt is paid, but you've brought a war to my door. You need to disappear. As they walked out of the trading post, leaving Harrison trembling behind the counter, Henry grabbed Mitchell's arm. What have I done? Who are these people? They're the people who take everything, Mitchell said, his eyes scanning the horizon. And they're coming. They're coming for the girl. Back at the ranch, a storm was brewing. Not in the sky, but in the heart of the kind-eyed housekeeper, Mrs. Davies. As Rose helped her shell peas on the porch, the same porch where her own mother used to sit, Mrs. Davies suddenly stopped. Her gaze was fixed on a small, faded piece of ribbon tied around Rose's wrist. Rose had worn it for as long as she could remember. It was the last thing her mother had given her. Where did you get that? Mrs. Davies asked, her voice barely a whisper. My mother gave it to me, Rose said. Mrs. Davies reached out a trembling hand and touched the fabric. Her face was pale. This pattern, this weave, it's from the Silver Creek loom. It's a marker. Rose looked down at the simple ribbon, confused. A marker for what? For property, Mrs. Davies said, her eyes filling with a terrifying ancient fear. The syndicate marks the children they select from birth. They watch them. They cultivate them. Your father didn't choose to sell you, child. The choice was made for him the day you were born. The world tilted on its axis. Her whole life, her father's struggles, the drought, the debt, it was all a lie. A carefully constructed tragedy designed to deliver her, packaged and ready, into the hands of monsters. Just then, two riders appeared on the horizon, Mitchell and her father. When they got back, Mitchell didn't have to explain. Mrs. Davies met him on the porch, holding up the ribbon. Jonathan, she said, using his first name for the first time Rose had ever heard. It's one of theirs. She's been marked since birth. Mitchell's face went hard as granite. I know, Harrison's ledger confirmed it. He pulled a small, leather-bound book from his saddlebag. Her name was in here, along with a dozen others. It wasn't a debt collection. It was a harvest schedule. Henry Crawford finally broke. He fell to his knees, the sound he made not quite human. It was the sound of a soul tearing in two. My wife, Margaret, he choked out. She worked for a time, before we were married, mending clothes for a charitable society run by a rich woman from Silver Creek. They gave her gifts, fabric, ribbons. It all clicked into place. The charity was a front. His wife, unknowingly, had marked their own child for slaughter. What do we do? Henry wailed, looking at Mitchell. They'll never stop now. We don't run, Mitchell said, his voice a low growl. We prepare. He looked at Mrs. Davies. Is the cellar ready? She nodded. The same as it ever was. Rose watched them, a cold dread seeping into her bones. This wasn't a ranch. It was an outpost, a watchtower. And Mrs. Davies wasn't just a housekeeper. She was a sentry. They had been waiting. For years they had been waiting for the war to come back to them. And it was about to arrive. Mitchell turned to Rose. Listen to me. No matter what you hear, no matter what happens, you stay with Mrs. Davies. You do exactly as she says. Understand? Before Rose could answer, a lookout bell from the main barn began to clang, frantic and high-pitched. 4 riders were cresting the ridge. They weren't moving fast. They rode with the slow, arrogant swagger of men who owned the ground beneath their horses' hooves. The man in the lead was thin, dressed in a silver-trimmed vest that glinted in the sun. Even from a distance, Rose could feel the coldness radiating off him. This was the man from Silver Creek, the collector. Get her inside, Mitchell commanded. Henry, get a rifle. You wanted to protect your daughter? Now's your chance. Henry, his face streaked with tears and dirt, scrambled to his feet. The broken farmer was gone. In his place was a man with nothing left to lose. As Mrs. Davies pulled Rose toward the house, Rose looked back. She saw Mitchell standing in the middle of the yard, rifle in hand, a solitary figure against the vast, empty landscape. He wasn't just protecting a little girl. He was protecting a memory. He was finally getting the chance to fight the battle he'd lost 15 years ago. The collector reined in his horse just out of rifle range. Jonathan Mitchell, he called out, his voice smooth and cultured. It's been a long time. They told me you'd gone soft, turned into a farmer. I turned my back, Mitchell shouted back. There's a difference. Not from where I'm standing, the collector sneered. You have something that belongs to us, a piece of marked property. Send the girl out and we'll forget you ever existed. She's not property, Henry screamed from the porch, his voice cracking with rage and grief. The collector's eyes flicked to Henry, dismissing him as nothing. The girl, he repeated, his voice dropping to a deadly calm. Now. Mitchell raised his rifle. Ride on, he said, or die here. The collector smiled. It was a terrible sight. I was hoping you'd say that. He raised a hand, and from behind the ridge, more men appeared. 10 of them, then 20, an army. They hadn't come for a negotiation. They had come to burn the Mitchell Ranch to the ground and salt the earth. The collector drew his pistol, a beautiful, silver-inlaid weapon. "A shame," he said. "Sarah was such a lovely child, so much potential. We had great plans for her." The words were meant to break Mitchell, to shatter his resolve, but they did the opposite. Rose, watching from the window, saw the change. The calm, steady rancher vanished. In his place stood the man Harrison had called the ghost. His face became a mask of pure, cold rage. "You should never have said her name," Mitchell whispered. Then the world exploded in gunfire. The first shot didn't come from Mitchell. It came from the upstairs window of the ranch house, a high-powered crack that echoed across the valley. One of the collector's men tumbled from his saddle, a neat hole drilled through his chest. Mrs. Davies stood at the window, Mitchell's heavy hunting rifle pressed to her shoulder, her kind eyes now cold and hard as chips of flint. The housekeeper was a sniper. The collector's men, caught by surprise, opened fire. Bullets chewed through the wooden porch, shattering windows, kicking up dust in the yard. It was a hailstorm of lead. Mitchell and Henry returned fire, taking cover behind a water trough. Every shot was precise, calculated. They were outnumbered, outgunned, but they were fighting on their own turf. Inside, Mrs. Davies pulled Rose away from the window. "To the cellar!" she commanded, her voice sharp. The cellar wasn't for storing jams and preserves. The walls were reinforced with stone and steel beams. There were hidden gun ports, boxes of ammunition, and barrels of water. It was a bunker. "He built this after they took Sarah," Mrs. Davies explained, her hands moving with practiced efficiency, lighting lanterns, checking the seals on the heavy door. "He swore he would never be caught unprepared again." The battle raged outside. Shouts, screams, the constant thunder of rifles. Rose could hear the splintering of wood as the front door gave way. They were inside the house. Heavy footsteps pounded on the floorboards above them. A man shouted, "They're not up here! Check the cellar!" Mrs. Davies shoved a small loaded pistol into Rose's hands. "If that door opens, and it's not me or your father or Mr. Mitchell, you use this. You don't let them take you. Do you hear me, child? You do not let them take you." Rose's hands trembled, but she nodded, her eyes wide with terror. Suddenly a new sound cut through the chaos, the roar of fire. They were burning the house down, trying to smoke them out. The air in the cellar grew thick and hot, then a moment of silence. It was more terrifying than the noise. A single calm voice echoed from above. It was the collector. "Mitchell, your house is burning. Your men are dead. It's over. Give me the girl and I'll grant you a quick death. A mercy I never gave your precious Sarah." A floorboard directly above the cellar door creaked. Rose aimed her pistol at it, her heart hammering. Then she heard Mitchell's voice, not from outside but from somewhere close. "The tunnel!" he hissed. A section of the stone wall in the cellar swung inward. Mitchell stood there covered in soot, a wild look in his eyes. Henry was behind him, clutching a bleeding wound in his side. "Come on, now," Mitchell urged. They scrambled into a narrow, dirt-walled tunnel. It was pitch black and smelled of damp earth. Mitchell sealed the stone door behind them, just as the cellar door above them crashed open. "They're gone!" the collector roared in frustration. They stumbled through the darkness, Henry leaning heavily on Mitchell. The tunnel went on and on, sloping downwards. "Where are we going?" Rose whispered. "Away," Mitchell grunted. After what felt like an eternity, they saw a faint light ahead. The tunnel opened into a small, hidden canyon a mile from the ranch house, where 3 horses were tied, waiting. As they burst into the moonlight, Henry Crawford collapsed. The wound in his side was worse than they thought. "Papa!" Rose cried, kneeling beside him. He coughed, blood speckling his lips. He looked at Rose, his eyes clear for the first time in years. The shame and the fear were gone. "I'm sorry, Rosebud," he whispered, using her childhood nickname. I never meant." "I know, Papa," she sobbed. He pressed something into her hand. It was the small leather ledger he'd taken from Harrison's. "I'm not a good man," he gasped, "but I saw him hide this. It's his records, the real ones." He looked at Mitchell. "Take her. Get her away from this. Be the father I wasn't." His eyes fluttered and closed. Henry Crawford, the broken farmer who had tried to sell his daughter, had died saving her. But his final act was more than just redemption. It was a weapon. Mitchell gently closed Henry's eyes. There was no time to mourn. He could hear shouting from the direction of the ranch. They'd found the tunnel. He lifted Rose onto a horse. "We ride," he said, his voice raw with grief and fury. "We ride until we can't ride anymore." As they galloped into the night, the flames from the Mitchell ranch lit up the sky behind them, a funeral pyre for a life that was gone forever. Rose clutched the ledger, its secrets hidden within. She didn't know it yet, but the little book her father had died for contained a list of names. Names of children who had been taken, names of the powerful, wealthy men who had bought them, and one other name. The name of the man at the very top of the Scorpion Syndicate. A name that would shake the entire territory to its foundations. This was no longer just about saving Rose. This was about burning the whole rotten system to the ground. They rode for 2 days and 2 nights, pushing the horses to their limits, stopping only for moments to drink from streams and chew on dried jerky. The wild, untamed land was their only ally. Mitchell wasn't the kind rancher anymore. He was someone else. He moved with the quiet, deadly efficiency of a predator, his eyes constantly scanning, listening for sounds that Rose couldn't hear. He taught her how to muffle the horse's hooves with rags, how to build a fire that produced almost no smoke, how to read the tracks of men and animals. He was teaching her how to be a ghost, just like him. Mrs. Davies, too, was transformed. The warm housekeeper had been stripped away, revealing a core of tempered steel. She never complained, never showed fear. She was a survivor. On the 3rd night, they took shelter in an abandoned line shack, a tiny wooden box in the middle of nowhere. By the light of a single candle, Mitchell finally opened the ledger Henry had given them. The pages were filled with Harrison's spidery handwriting. It was a meticulous record of his vile trade. Dates, names, prices, but it was more than just a list of transactions. It was a map of the syndicate's web. "Look," Mitchell said, pointing to a name. "Sheriff Brody of Clearwater." Another. "Judge Hemlock of the Territorial Court." It was a cancer that had spread everywhere. The law wasn't just corrupt, it was an active partner. They couldn't go to anyone for help. They were utterly, completely alone. Then Rose saw her own name, Rose Crawford, marked at birth. Harvest scheduled for her 12th year. Buyer, the collector, for Silver Creek Preparatory Academy. "Preparatory Academy?" Rose whispered. I thought it was a bad place." Mrs. Davies let out a harsh, bitter laugh. "Oh, it's a school, all right. I was one of their first students. They don't just sell you, they train you. They break you down and rebuild you into whatever their clients want. Thieves, spies, assassins. They turn children into perfect, beautiful, soulless weapons." Her story came tumbling out. She'd been an orphan, taken in by the so-called charitable society. She'd spent 10 years inside the walls of the academy, learning how to lie, to steal, to kill. She escaped during a transfer, ran until her feet bled, and was eventually found, half dead, by a young Jonathan Mitchell. He'd given her a new name, a new life, and a sworn promise to help him if the syndicate ever found him. "He was different then," she said, looking at Mitchell. "Before they took Sarah. He was one of them." Rose stared at Mitchell, her world tilting once more. Mitchell didn't deny it. "I was an enforcer," he said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. "The best they had. They called me the ghost because I could get in anywhere, deal with any problem, and disappear. I did things, terrible things, but I wanted out. I met Sarah's mother. I wanted a different life. I made a deal with the head of the syndicate, my life of service in exchange for my freedom." He paused, the silence in the tiny shack stretching thin. "They agreed. They let me walk away. I bought the ranch. I had Sarah. I was happy. I thought they kept their word. But the syndicate never lets anything go. They don't see people. They see assets. And an asset like me was too valuable to lose." His voice broke. "They didn't just take Sarah as revenge. They took her as a replacement. My retirement gift to them was my own daughter." The confession hung in the air, raw and painful. Rose finally understood the depth of his rage. This wasn't just about justice. It was about atonement. He was fighting to save Rose because he had failed to save his own child. There's a name here at the end, Mitchell said, his finger tracing the last entry in the ledger. A name above all the others. The founder. The man they call the architect. He turned the book so Rose could see. The name was written in elegant flowing script. Governor Marcus Thorne. The governor of the entire territory. The most powerful man in the West. The man whose face was on posters in every town, promising law and order, progress and prosperity. He was the monster at the heart of the web. How do you fight a man who owns the army, the courts, and the law itself? How do you kill a king? We can't, Mrs. Davies said, her voice trembling. Jonathan, it's impossible. He's untouchable. No one is untouchable, Mitchell said, a dangerous light in his eyes. He looked at the list of other names in the book. The sheriffs, the judges, the businessmen, all cogs in Thorne's machine. You can't kill a king by attacking his castle. You have to burn his kingdom down around him first. He began to formulate a plan. It was audacious, reckless, and very likely suicidal. They would use the ledger not as evidence, because no honest court existed to hear it, but as a weapon. They would turn the syndicate against itself. The collector is hunting us, Mitchell said. He thinks we're running, so we're going to stop running. We're going to lead him into a trap, and we're going to send a message to Governor Thorne, written in the collector's blood. They were no longer prey, they were now the hunters, and their first target was the man who had burned their world to the ground. They chose their battleground carefully, an old abandoned mining town called Rust Peak, nestled in a box canyon with only one way in and one way out. It was a ghost town full of crumbling buildings and dark, collapsed mine shafts, a perfect place for an ambush. The plan was terrifyingly simple. They would let themselves be found. Mitchell sent up a smoke signal, a trick he knew the syndicate trackers would recognize as a sign of a panicked fugitive. Then they waited. For a full day, nothing happened. The silence of the ghost town was unnerving. Rose's nerves were stretched to the breaking point. What if they didn't come? What if the plan failed? Then on the second morning they appeared. The collector and a dozen of his best men, riding slowly into the canyon, their eyes scanning the dilapidated buildings. They were cautious but arrogant. They were cornering a wounded animal, and they were enjoying it. He'll split them up, Mitchell whispered from their hiding spot in the rafters of the old saloon. He'll send teams to sweep the buildings one by one. And that's exactly what happened. The collector sent 4 men to the assay office, 4 to the livery stable, and kept 4 with him to advance up the main street. It was the oldest mistake in the book. Never divide your forces. The first shot came from the bell tower of the ruined church, Mrs. Davies with her sniper rifle. One of the collector's men dropped without a sound. Before the others could react, a second shot. Another man down. Panic erupted. The men scrambled for cover, firing wildly at the church. But it was a diversion. As they were distracted, Mitchell dropped from the saloon rafters behind the team on the main street. He moved like smoke, a knife in one hand, a pistol in the other. 2 men went down before they even knew he was there. The other 2 spun around, but Mitchell was too fast. 2 more shots, muffled by the thunder of the other guns, and the entire team was eliminated. At the same time, from a network of cellars beneath the town, Rose was doing her part. Her job was to create chaos. She scurried through the darkness, lighting fuses connected to old mining charges they had found and placed strategically. A huge explosion rocked the livery stable, sending splinters and dust into the air, collapsing the roof on top of the men inside. They weren't dead, but they were trapped, screaming and confused. Now it was just the team at the assay office, and the collector himself who had taken cover behind an overturned ore cart. He was no fool. He realized what was happening. This wasn't a desperate last stand. It was a slaughter, a perfectly executed trap. "Ghost!" he screamed, his voice raw with fury. "Face me, you coward!" As if in answer, another explosion, this one smaller, went off near the mouth of the canyon, triggering a rock slide that completely blocked the only exit. They were all trapped. The remaining 4 men at the assay office decided to make a run for it. They burst out of the building, firing wildly. Mrs. Davies picked off 1 from the church tower. Mitchell, now hidden on a different rooftop, took down 2 more. The last man stood alone in the middle of the street, his eyes wide with terror. He dropped his gun and raised his hands. "I surrender!" he yelled. From the shadows of the blacksmith shop, Mitchell stepped out. "The syndicate doesn't accept surrenders," he said, and fired. Now, it was just the collector. Silence descended on the ghost town. The wind whistled through the broken buildings. "I know you're out there, Mitchell," the collector shouted, his voice echoing in the canyon. "This changes nothing. The governor will send 100 more men, 1,000. You can't win." "I don't need to win," Mitchell's voice replied, seeming to come from everywhere at once. "I just need to make him bleed." Rose, hidden in her cellar, watched through a crack in the floorboards as the collector frantically scanned the rooftops. He was a predator who had suddenly, terrifyingly, become the prey. He made a desperate dash for a new piece of cover. In that moment, Mitchell stepped out from behind the saloon, not 20 yards away. The two men faced each other in the dusty street, like an old-fashioned duel. The collector sneered. "So, the ghost finally shows his face. You'll pay for this. I'll take the girl, and I will personally deliver her to the academy. I will oversee her education. She will scream your name for years." He was trying to bait Mitchell, to make him angry, reckless. But Mitchell's face was a mask of ice. He slowly raised his pistol. "This is for Sarah," he said. The collector went for his gun. He was fast, a blur of motion. But Mitchell didn't aim for his gun hand. He didn't aim for his chest. His shot was impossibly precise. It hit the collector in the knee, shattering the bone. The man screamed and fell to the ground, his pistol skittering away in the dust. Mitchell walked slowly towards him, his boots crunching on the gravel. He stood over the writhing man. "Death is too easy for you," Mitchell said, his voice cold enough to freeze blood. "You're going to deliver a message for me." He knelt down and did something Rose couldn't see. The collector let out a horrifying, inhuman shriek of pain that echoed through the canyon and then fell silent, unconscious. When Mitchell stood up, he was holding the collector's silver-trimmed vest. In his other hand was a bloody knife. He turned and walked away, leaving the collector alive, but broken, mutilated. "Let's go," he called out. "Phase 1 is complete." Rose crept out of the cellar, her whole body shaking. Mrs. Davies climbed down from the church tower. They gathered at the edge of the town, not looking back. As they rode away, Rose finally got the courage to ask, "What did you do to him?" Mitchell didn't look at her. He just stared at the horizon. "The syndicate brands its property with a scorpion," he said, his voice flat. "I gave him a new brand, a ghost, so that every time Governor Thorne looks at his top man, he'll remember that the man he couldn't kill is coming for him." He had sent his message. The war had just begun. The victory at Rust Peak was hollow. They had won a battle, but the war felt more impossible than ever. The ledger gave them the names, but those names were untouchable, shielded by the governor's power. They retreated deep into the mountains, to a place from Mitchell's past, a hidden network of caves he had used as a hideout in his days as the ghost. It was there they planned their next move. "We can't fight our way through his entire organization," Mitchell said, pacing the length of the main cave. "It's an army. We need to poison the well, make them tear each other apart." The ledger was their poison. It didn't just contain names, it detailed payments, secret deals, and betrayals. It was a blueprint of the syndicate's greed and paranoia. "Here," Mitchell said, pointing to a section. "Judge Hemlock. He's been skimming money from the syndicate's shipments for years. The collector was sent to investigate him right before he came after us." "And this," said Mrs. Davies, who had been studying the ledger for days, her mind sharp and analytical. "Sheriff Brody. He's been feeding information to a rival gang in exchange for a cut of their gambling profits. He's betraying the syndicate." The plan began to form. It was a campaign of whispers and lies, using the truth as their most dangerous weapon. They started with Judge Hemlock. Mitchell rode to the nearest major town, disguised as a drunken prospector. He found a low-level thug known to work for the syndicate and accidentally let slip a rumor. He spoke of a ledger, a book of secrets, and how Judge Hemlock's name was featured prominently, not as a loyal soldier, but as a thief. To add fuel to the fire, Mrs. Davies, using her skills from the academy, forged a letter in the judge's handwriting. It was a panicked message to a contact outside the syndicate, planning his escape. She paid a stable boy a silver dollar to deliver it to the local syndicate lieutenant. The seeds of doubt were planted. Next was Sheriff Brody. Rose played a key role in this one. Dressed as a street urchin, she approached the sheriff in the middle of town. In a loud voice for everyone to hear, she thanked him for the coin his friends from the O'Malley gang had given her for keeping quiet about their meetings. Brody went pale. The O'Malleys were the syndicate's biggest rivals. To be publicly associated with them was a death sentence. One by one, they used the information in the ledger to light fires of mistrust throughout the syndicate's network. An anonymous tip here, a forged document there. They turned loyal men into suspected traitors. They made allies look like enemies. It was working. Reports began to trickle in from travelers and sympathetic contacts. A syndicate paymaster found dead in a hotel room in Clearwater. A shootout between Sheriff Brody's deputies and a group of syndicate enforcers. Judge Hemlock's carriage ambushed on the road. His body left for the vultures. The kingdom was starting to burn. Governor Thorne was losing control, his web of power unraveling strand by strand. He was cutting off his own limbs to stop the infection from spreading, executing his own men out of paranoia. But their campaign came at a cost. With every move they made, they left a faint trail. The governor, enraged and desperate, pulled his best trackers from across the territory. They weren't thugs like the collector's crew. These were professionals, relentless and cunning. The hunt was on again, and this time their enemies were smarter. One evening, as they were camped in a deep forest, the attack came without warning. A volley of arrows, silent and deadly, thudded into the trees around them. Syndicate assassins. They scattered, Mitchell's training kicking in. He returned fire, providing cover while Mrs. Davies dragged Rose into the underbrush. An arrow sliced through Mitchell's arm, but he didn't even flinch. They were pinned down, outnumbered. The trackers were closing in, moving through the trees like wraiths. Just when it seemed hopeless, a new sound split the night. A shotgun blast from an unexpected direction. One of the assassins fell from a tree. A figure emerged from the shadows. An old man with a long gray beard and a fire in his eyes, wielding a shotgun with expert ease. He was a mountain man, a hermit. "Get to my cabin," he yelled, firing again. "They won't follow you there." They ran, following the old man to a small, expertly hidden cabin built into the side of the mountain. The assassins, wary of the stranger's skill and the defensive position, melted back into the forest. Inside the cabin, the old man bolted the door. "Name's Jedediah," he grunted, tending to Mitchell's wound. "Been watching you for days. Anyone who makes that much trouble for the governor's men is a friend of mine." Jedediah, it turned out, had his own history with the governor. Years ago, Thorne had used his power to seize Jedediah's land for a railroad deal, killing his family in the process. He had been living in the mountains ever since, a ghost of a different kind, nursing a deep and patient hatred. "You're making a lot of noise," Jedediah said, looking at Mitchell. "But noise ain't enough. You want to kill a snake, you got to cut off its head. And the head of this snake is at the Silver Creek Preparatory Academy." He confirmed what they suspected. The academy was more than a school. It was the governor's fortress, his command center. It was where he kept his most valuable assets, the children. Every year, Jedediah explained, on the anniversary of the academy's founding, Thorne hosts a gala. All his rich, sick clients come to bid on the new graduates. It's the one night of the year he feels safe, the one night he lets his guard down. A new plan began to form, a final, desperate gamble. They wouldn't just expose the governor. They would do it on his grandest stage. They would infiltrate the academy during the gala. But this mission required more than just Mitchell's skills. It required someone who could move through that world unnoticed. Someone who knew the academy's secrets. All eyes turned to Mrs. Davies. "I can't go back there," she whispered, her face pale. The thought of returning to the place of her nightmares was paralyzing. "We need you," Mitchell said gently. "You're the only one who can guide us." But it was Rose who made the difference. She took Mrs. Davies' hand. "You told me not to let them take me," she said, her voice small but firm. "There are other children in there. We can't let them be taken either." You have to be brave for them. Looking at the child she had come to love as her own, Mrs. Davies saw not just a reflection of her past, but a reason for her future. Her fear was overshadowed by a fierce, protective resolve. "All right," she said, her voice steady. "I'll take you inside. I'll show you every secret passage, every hidden room. We are going to burn that place to the ground." Their target was set. The final battle would be fought in the heart of the monster's lair. The Silver Creek Preparatory Academy for Young Ladies was not the dark, grim fortress Rose had imagined. It was beautiful. A sprawling estate of pristine white buildings, manicured lawns, and rose gardens, all surrounded by a high stone wall. It looked like a palace. But as Jedediah said, the prettiest flowers often have the deadliest poison. Getting in was the first challenge. The gala was the most exclusive event in the territory. Invitations were priceless, but the ledger gave them an opening. One of the names was a wealthy industrialist from the East, a Mr. Alistair Finch, who was a new client. The syndicate would know his name, but not his face. Mitchell would become Mr. Finch. The transformation was remarkable. With a shave, a new suit, and a change in posture, the rugged ghost became a sophisticated, arrogant tycoon. Mrs. Davies, using her knowledge of the upper class, coached him on etiquette, speech, and mannerisms. She, in turn, would pose as a new governess, hired to handle a difficult new student, Rose. It was the perfect cover to get them inside the academy's private wings. Jedediah, with his knowledge of the surrounding mountains, would create a diversion outside the walls at the precise moment they needed it most. On the night of the gala, a carriage pulled up to the academy's gilded gates. Mitchell, as Finch, stepped out, presenting his invitation. The guards, seeing the name, waved them through with deference. Rose's heart pounded as they walked into the main hall. It was a scene of obscene opulence. Men in fine suits and women in glittering gowns laughed and drank champagne, their faces masks of civility hiding monstrous appetites. And moving among them, silent and graceful, were the graduates. Young girls no older than Rose, with beautiful dresses and dead, empty eyes. They were the product of the academy, perfect dolls waiting to be sold. The governor, Marcus Thorne, stood on a raised dais, greeting his guests. He was handsome, charismatic, every inch the respected leader. He smiled and shook Mitchell's hand, his eyes cold and empty as a shark's. "Mr. Finch, a pleasure to finally meet you. I trust you'll find our offerings exceptional." "I have very particular tastes, Governor," Mitchell replied, his voice smooth as silk. As Mitchell distracted the governor, Mrs. Davies guided Rose away from the party, using a service corridor she remembered from her time there. "The records room is in the West Wing," she whispered. "That's where Thorne keeps his real ledgers, the ones with the names of all his international clients. That's the proof we need." The halls of the academy were quiet and sterile. Portraits of smiling girls lined the walls, ghosts of the children who had been consumed by this place. Mrs. Davies trembled, memories flooding back, but Rose's small hand in hers kept her grounded. They found the records room. The door was locked with a complex modern tumbler. "I can't open this," Mrs. Davies said in despair. But Rose had been watching Mitchell. She pulled a small piece of wire from the hem of her dress. Mitchell had been teaching her, not just how to shoot and track, but how to think like a ghost. Her small, nimble fingers worked at the lock. After a tense minute, it clicked open. The room was filled with identical, leather-bound books, an archive of human misery. "We can't take them all," Rose said. "We don't have to," said Mrs. Davies. She pointed to a small wood-burning stove in the corner, used for heat. "We just have to make sure no one else can ever read them either." They began to feed the ledgers into the fire. Back at the gala, the auction was beginning. The collector, his leg in a heavy brace, and his face a mask of scar tissue where Mitchell had carved him, limped onto the stage. He presented the first graduate, a girl with fiery red hair and a vacant stare. The bidding began. These men weren't buying a person, they were buying a thing, an object. Mitchell watched, his face a neutral mask, but his hands were clenched into fists. He had to keep Thorne occupied. He started a bidding war, driving the price up to an absurd figure. drawing all the attention to himself. Just as the records room began to fill with smoke, the diversion started. A series of massive explosions rocked the outer wall of the estate. Jedediah, using a lifetime's knowledge of explosives, was putting on a show. Panic erupted at the gala. Guards rushed outside. In the chaos, Mitchell slipped away. He met Mrs. Davies and Rose in the hallway as smoke began to pour from under the records room door. An alarm bell began to clang. "It's done," Mrs. Davies said. "The proof is gone." "Good," Mitchell said. "Now for the head of the snake." They didn't head for the exit. They headed for the governor's private office. Thorne would go there to secure his personal effects before fleeing. They found him just as they expected, frantically stuffing papers and gold into a briefcase. He spun around as they entered, his face a mask of fury. "You!" he snarled at Mitchell. "The ghost! I should have killed you myself all those years ago." "You tried," Mitchell said, raising his pistol. "You sent my daughter here instead." "A fitting trade," Thorne spat. "She was a fine asset, far more valuable than you." From behind Mitchell, Rose stepped forward. She wasn't holding a gun. She was holding the small, tattered ledger her father had died for. "There are other children here," she said, her voice clear and strong, ringing with a power that Thorne couldn't understand. "We're not leaving them behind." It was a bluff. They had no way to free them all, but Thorne didn't know that. He hesitated, his eyes flicking between Mitchell's gun and the sounds of chaos outside. His empire was literally burning down around him. "You can't escape," Mitchell said. "Your kingdom is gone. Your secrets are ash. But I'll give you a choice. The one you never gave my daughter. Open the cells and let the children go, and I'll let you live to see your trial." Thorne laughed, a high, unhinged sound. "Trial? I am the law." "Not anymore," a new voice said. The door to the office burst open. Standing there was a troop of territorial marshals, their guns leveled. At their head was a man Mitchell recognized from the wanted posters, Marshal Franklin James, the one lawman in the territory even Thorne couldn't buy. Jedediah hadn't just created a diversion. He'd ridden like the wind to the marshal's office with a signed confession from the guard they'd captured at Rust Peak, detailing everything. Governor Thorne stared at the marshals, then at Mitchell. The mask of civility was gone. In his eyes was the pure, feral hatred of a cornered snake. He made a sudden move, not for a gun, but for a decanter of brandy on his desk. He hurled it at a large oil lamp. The room erupted in flames. Through the fire and smoke, Thorne lunged towards a hidden panel in the wall, a secret escape route. But Mitchell was faster. He tackled him, and the two men crashed to the floor. The fire spread with terrifying speed, consuming the office, the symbol of Thorne's power. "Get Rose out of here!" Mitchell yelled to Mrs. Davies. Mrs. Davies grabbed Rose and pulled her toward the door, just as the burning ceiling began to collapse. Rose looked back one last time. Through the roaring flames, she saw two figures locked in a desperate final struggle. The ghost and the architect, a battle 15 years in the making, finally reaching its end in a crucible of their own making. Marshal James and his men pulled them from the hallway just as the entire office was consumed by a fireball. There was no sign of Mitchell or the governor. Both had been swallowed by the inferno. Rose stood on the lawn of the burning academy, watching the flames lick the night sky. The other children, freed from their cells in the chaos, were being gathered by the marshals, blinking in the firelight, confused but safe. She had won. They had won. They had cut the head off the snake, but she had lost the only father she had left. She clutched the tattered ledger to her chest and, for the first time since this nightmare began, she cried. In the aftermath, the Scorpion Syndicate collapsed. With the governor dead and his records destroyed, the entire network crumbled into dust. The wealthy clients, exposed and terrified, turned on each other. The territory was cleansed by fire. The Silver Creek Academy was left as a charred ruin, a monument to the evil it had housed. The children were sent to orphanages and new homes, their stories never fully told, the horrors they endured buried with the ashes. Rose was taken in by Marshal James, a kind man who promised to find her a good home. But no home felt right. Mrs. Davies stayed with her, the two of them bound by their shared trauma and their love for the man who had saved them both. They returned to Dustwater Creek a month later. The town was the same, yet different. The shadow of Harrison's evil had lifted. People seemed to breathe easier. Rose visited her father's grave, and next to it she placed a simple wooden cross with the name Jonathan Mitchell carved into it. He had no body to bury, but he deserved a place to be remembered. "Thank you," she whispered to the empty patch of earth. "Thank you for making me worth more than money." Years passed. Rose grew up. She didn't become a teacher or marry a man from back east. The fire had forged her into something else. With the money Mitchell had left in a hidden account, his life's earnings as the ghost, she and Mrs. Davies founded a new kind of home. Not an orphanage, but a sanctuary. They bought the land where the Mitchell Ranch once stood and rebuilt it. But it wasn't a ranch anymore. It was a school, a real school for the lost and forgotten children of the frontier. A place where they could be safe, where they could learn, where they could heal. She dedicated her life to being a voice for those who had none. She fought for new laws, for the protection of children, her story becoming a quiet legend told in the halls of power. She was no longer Rose Crawford, the girl who was sold, or Rose Mitchell, the girl who was saved. She was just Rose, a protector. One day when she was a young woman of 17, a stranger rode up to the sanctuary. He was an old man with a long gray beard and kind eyes. It was Jedediah. "Got something for you," he said, handing her a worn leather parcel. "A man asked me to hold it for him. Said to give it to you when you were old enough." Rose's hands trembled as she opened it. Inside was a heavy silver belt buckle. Engraved on it was a scorpion. But scratched over the top of it, crude but clear, was the image of a ghost. Tucked into the leather was a note. The handwriting was rough, unsteady. "Daughter, a ghost can't have a family, but a man can. I had to let the ghost die in that fire so the man could live. I'm sorry I had to leave. It was the only way to keep you safe, to let you have a life without my shadow. Be happy. Be strong. Know that wherever I am watching over you. You made an old rancher remember what it means to love. Your father, J.M., tears streamed down her face. He was alive. He had survived the fire. He had given up everything, even her, to ensure she would have a future free from his past. His final act wasn't one of vengeance, but of the ultimate sacrifice. He had become a true ghost, a guardian spirit watching from the shadows, letting her build her own life on the ashes of his. Rose clutched the buckle to her chest. She never saw him again, but she knew he was out there. And every time she saved another child, every time she brought another lost soul into her sanctuary, she was keeping his promise. She was his legacy. The story of the rancher who bought a girl for more than she was worth became a legend. A story that reminds us that family isn't about blood. It's about who you're willing to fight for. It's a reminder that even in the deepest darkness, a single act of courage can light a fire that burns away the evil and warms the world. If you found this story of justice and redemption compelling, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell. You never know what secrets are hiding in the dust of the past, and we'll be here to uncover them. Let me know in the comments. What do you think Jonathan Mitchell did after he disappeared? Until next time, stay safe and always fight for those who can't fight for themselves.